the seeds directly outside. You'll want to start about 3 months before the expected fall frost. Simply plant the seeds a quarter to a half inch, 6 millimeters to 1.3 centimeters deep, and 1 inch, 3.5 centimeters apart. After they're planted, make sure to sprinkle them lightly with water. Note, collard responds very well to fertile soil conditions. Because of that, it's beneficial to work lots of compost into each row, about 2 to 3 weeks before planting. Collard prefers well-drained fertile soil that has a pH of 6.0 to 7.5. It can tolerate slightly alkaline soil and some drought, but too little water will have a negative impact on the quality and flavor of the leaves. When sowing your collard seeds outside, you can thin your seedlings to be 8 to 12 inches, 20 to 30 centimeters apart once they've emerged. In terms of watering, about 1 inch of rainfall each week is a good amount to keep your soil moist. But if you've got sandy soil, you'll want to water your collard more than once a week, since sandy soil doesn't retain moisture very well. You'll also want to make sure to keep weeds under control. Frequent and shallow cultivation helps to keep weeds away, but just be careful you don't go too deep, or else you might damage your plants. When your plants are about 4 inches, 10.16 centimeters tall, apply some fertilizer alongside your plant rows. You can use either a half cup of a 46 to 0 to 0 solution, 1 cup of a 27 to 3 to 3 solution, or a cup and a half of a 10 to 3 to 1 solution for each 100 feet, 2.54 meters. Spread it in a band about 6 inches wide, then scratch it into the surface of your soil. Make sure you don't apply fertilizers that contain weed killers, as these can also kill your vegetable plants. If you're looking to improve your soil, you can do so by adding well-rotted manure or compost in the spring and fall. By using organic matter this way, you might not actually need any additional fertilizers. You won't want to use fresh manure though, because it might contain harmful bacteria. It's best to use herbicide-free grass clippings, straw, or other organic material. These help to prevent weed growth and can also keep away some pesky pests. Transplanting best practices. Before transplanting, harden off your seedlings first by setting them outside for a few hours per day. You can start this process about a week before you plan on transplanting. While they're hardening off, make sure to keep them sheltered from any wind or hot sun. Then, about 2 to 3 days before transplanting, lower their water and temperature levels to get them used to outdoor conditions. You'll want to transplant your spring crops about 2 weeks before the last expected frost, setting them 8 to 12 inches, 20 to 30 centimeters apart, in rows that are 18 inches, 46 centimeters apart. Companion plants, do's and don'ts. Do's. Plant your collard with chamomile, dill, mint, rosemary, and sage, because their smell keeps pests away. Tomatoes are another great companion, because they repel flea beetles. Don'ts. Eggplants, peppers, potatoes. Growing structure options. Container. This is a good option if you want to grow collard on your balcony, or if you don't have enough space in your garden for conventional growing beds. Just make sure that your containers are big enough and have holes in the bottom for good water drainage. Raised beds. Raised beds have the advantage of good water drainage and a higher soil temperature since they aren't directly embedded in the ground. They also make for a more comfortable gardening experience since you don't have to bend or kneel down too far. Into the ground. If you've got the space and capacity, you can also grow collard directly in the ground. Make sure your soil is nice and fertile and also evenly watered. Don't forget to check the area for pre-existing diseases that might harm your crops. Aphids. These tiny pests come in a variety of colors: green, black, red, light orange, or yellow. And They mainly feed on the undersides of leaves and stems. What they're actually feeding on is the sap in plants, which ends up causing the plants damage. Aphids also leave behind a sticky substance called honeydew, and they are a pest that's known to spread diseases. Aphids can be tolerated by most plants when their numbers are low, but if there's a lot of aphids, they can stunt a plant's growth and cause a plant's leaves to turn yellow and fall off. Here's what to do. For the most part, plants can handle mild aphid infestations, but if they're found, a strong jet of water from a garden hose will wash them off the plants. Spraying plants with water should be done early in the morning so that the plants can dry off during the day. Sticky traps, neem oil, insecticidal soaps, and horticultural oils are also effective against aphids. Just be sure to follow the application instructions on the packaging. Oftentimes, you can also get rid of aphids by wiping or spraying the leaves with a mild solution of water and a few drops of dish soap. One variation includes adding a pinch of cayenne pepper. Soapy water should be reapplied every 2 to 3 days, or about 2 weeks. As well, you can try to attract beneficial insects like lady beetles, hoverflies, and lacewings, all of which are important aphid predators. Make sure to check all transplants for aphids before planting. And keep in mind that aphids aren't very mobile, so it's not uncommon to find one heavily affected plant surrounded by plants that are fine. If this is the case, simply remove and destroy the infected plant. Armyworms. Armyworms are green, reddish, or black caterpillars that heavily feed on the leaves of plants, turning them into skeleton leaves that are filled with lots of irregular or circular-shaped holes. These pests are most active in the early morning and the late evening, which are the best times to check for damage. Here's what to do. You can use natural enemies like wasps and flies to help keep armyworms in check. Also, if you're using insecticides, it's best to do so in the twilight hours. This is when those insecticides will be the most effective. It's also important to control the growth of weeds because they serve as cover for armyworms. Finally, you can simply hand-pick any armyworms off the plants. Cabbage looper. Light to dark green caterpillars with wavy white lines on their back and sides, and a distinctive arch in their back when they move. They feed on the leaves of a plant, which is also where they hide, causing ragged, large holes to appear. The damage they cause to plants is often quite severe. Here's what to do. Looper numbers are usually held in check by their natural enemies, other insects. If they do become problematic, loopers can be hand-picked from the plants. You can also apply certain safe bacteria, which effectively kills the younger larvae, as well as insecticidal soaps. Just try to avoid using chemical sprays, because they will also damage helpful insects. Weeds attract and shelter these pests, so it's also important to keep weed growth under control. Pests can also be prevented and controlled by using row cover/insect netting when sowing or transplanting. As well, be sure to quickly remove any crop residue after harvest to prevent the looper from having a place to survive in over the winter. Cabbage worm. This caterpillar is gray-green in color and slightly fuzzy. After it eats the leaves of plants, it leaves holes and wet green droppings behind. Here's what to do. Hand-pick cabbage worms if you find them on any plants. There are also natural enemies like spiders, ground beetles, and parasitic wasps that will feed on these cabbage worms, which can be an effective and organic solution. Also, weeds attract and shelter these pests, so it's important to keep weed growth under control. Cabbage worms can also be prevented and controlled by using row cover or insect netting when sowing or transplanting. Cutworms. These are gray worms that curl their bodies around the stem of a plant and feed on it, which causes the plant to be cut off just above the soil surface. When their numbers are high, they can cause cause severe damage to the garden by causing plants to wilt and die off. Cutworms feed at night and hide in plant debris during the day, and they prey more on nutrient plants, seedlings, or young plants since their stems are more tender. There are a number of different types, but the most common are red-backed, dark-sided, and dingy cutworms. Here's what to do. Hand-pick any cutworms from the plants after dark, when they're most active. Also, keep a 3 to 4 foot buffer of dry soil along the edge of the garden to make it unattractive to cutworms. As well, remove plant residue to help reduce egg-laying sites, and get rid of weeds which can host young cutworm larvae. Be sure to till the garden before planting, which helps to expose and kill any larvae that might be present. Also, use compost instead of green manure, since manure might encourage egg laying. As well, try placing aluminum foil or cardboard collars around the plants to create a barrier, which will stop cutworm larvae from feeding. Simply place the collars around the plants so that one end is pushed a few inches into the soil, and the other end is several inches above the ground. Adding a layer of mulch will also help to prevent any cutworms from reaching the soil surface. And natural predators like wasps and ground beetles also help to control cutworm infestations. Finally, try spreading diatomaceous earth, essentially a soft powder made from the bones of tiny aquatic creatures, around the plant's base. This creates a sharp barrier that will keep cutworms out. Flea beetles. Small beetles that are either black, a blue color, bronze, gray, or sometimes striped. Flea beetles jump when they're disturbed, and they also shimmer in the light. Flea beetles feed on leaves and seedlings, and the damage from their feeding habits can stunt a plant's growth, reduce yields, spread diseases, or kill seedlings off entirely. Young plants are especially vulnerable, while older plants can survive an infestation much better. Here's what to do. Use a lightweight floating row cover at the beginning of the season to prevent flea beetles from becoming an issue. There's also a homemade spray that uses 2 cups of rubbing alcohol, 5 cups of water, and 1 tablespoon of liquid soap that can work to repel these bugs. Test out this mixture on a single leaf first. Let it sit overnight, then spray the rest of the plant if there aren't any side effects. Dusting plants with plain talcum powder can also help, as well as using white sticky traps to capture these pests as they jump. As well, weeds attract and shelter flea beetles, so it's important to keep weed growth under control. Insecticides might help for about a week, but they'll need to be reapplied, and adding a layer of mulch is yet another option. Be sure to practice crop rotation and plant seeds early to give them lots of time to establish themselves before the beetles become a problem. Mature plants are less susceptible to damage, so make sure to protect more vulnerable seedlings. Nematodes. Also known as roundworms, nematodes are microscopic worms that live in the soil as well as inside plant tissue. They stunt the growth of plants and cause galls, swelled growths, to form on a plant's roots, leaving them quite deformed. As well, leaves can become pale and twisted. Crops will eventually turn yellow from the damage and will then wilt in hot weather. A plant's yield can be affected by nematode damage, and in extreme cases, plants can die off entirely. Here's what to do. Practice crop rotation and plant-resistant varieties. As well, be sure to remove infected plants or plant residue to prevent nematodes from spreading to the next round of crops. Plant roots can be checked for galls, swelled growths, either mid-season or earlier if symptoms appear. If any galls are found, those affected plants should then be removed. Also, avoid spreading nematodes by thoroughly cleaning any garden equipment and by not moving any infected soil. Alternaria leaf blight. This fungus loves warm and wet conditions, causing brown spots with yellow edges to appear on the leaves, usually the oldest leaves first of a crop. The center of these lesions will also develop gray to brown soft fungal mold, eventually drying out and giving leaves a shot hole appearance. As the disease progresses, leaves will begin to curl and eventually will die and drop from the plant. This disease is common in growing areas with high temperatures and frequent rainfall. Here's what to do. Plant certified disease-resistant seeds when possible, and water plants from below to avoid having soil splash up onto the lower leaves of the plants. It's also helpful to water plants in the morning so that they have time to dry out during the day. In addition to watering plants from below, it's also helpful to provide a well-ventilated cover for the plants to protect the plants from rain. Be sure to clean any equipment between uses to prevent the spread of bacteria. And do not prune or handle plants when those plants are wet. As well, establish a crop rotation and stick to it. If there are any blighty leaves present, usually on the bottom of the plant closest to the soil, remove and destroy them. Finally, plant leaves can be sprayed with a baking soda solution. 1 tablespoon baking soda, 2.5 tablespoons of vegetable oil, and 1 teaspoon of liquid soap to 1 gallon of water. Or neem oil. Just take care not to use neem oil when pollinating insects like bees or other beneficial insects are present. Spray only a few leaves to start, then check for a reaction before applying every 2 weeks. Black rot. A soil or seed-borne bacteria that causes distinct lesions to form around the outsides of leaves. These lesions turn yellow/orange and travel inward on the infected leaves, typically in a V shape. As well, these lesions might come together and give plants a scorch appearance. Leaf veins will then turn dark, and the stems of the plant might become discolored as well, with some dark rings on them. Leaves might wilt, dry out, and drop, and plants can eventually die. Black rot can happen at any stage of the growth process and can be spread by splashing water, equipment, wind, people, or insects. The disease typically emerges in moist, warm conditions. Here's what to do. Plant disease-free seeds or resistant varieties when possible, but before planting, soak the seeds in 122° Fahrenheit water for about 25 minutes to kill any lingering bacteria. Keep in mind that soaking seeds this way isn't 100% effective against black rot and might actually lower the seed's germination rate. As well, practice a 2-year crop rotation and only use clean, sanitized tools near any crops. Wash tools with a diluted bleach mixture, about 1 part bleach to 10 parts water. Then rinse with cool water and towel dry after each use. It's important to control the growth of weeds and to follow the recommended plant spacing to increase airflow around plants, while also allowing plants to dry their leaves quicker. Be sure to remove and destroy any infected plants and avoid overhead watering. Damping off. This is one of the most common problems when starting plants from seed. Seedlings will emerge and appear healthy, then suddenly they'll wilt and die for no obvious reason. Damping off is caused by a fungus that thrives in moist conditions, and when soil and air temperatures are above 68° Fahrenheit. It can also thrive when soils have too much nitrogen fertilizer. This fungus favors slow-growing, deeply seeded plants. The stems of affected plants become water-soaked and will eventually collapse, while roots become too water-soaked and damaged to function. Older plants can also be affected, and either those older plants become stunted or they will collapse. Damping off can be spread 3 different ways, either in water, by contaminated soil, or on gardening equipment. Here's what to do. When possible, plant disease-free seeds. Keep seedlings moist, but avoid overwatering the seedlings to keep the soil from getting too wet. And try to keep the soil from getting too cold. Raised beds are usually a great option for planting, since raised beds help with drainage. Also, avoid over-fertilizing seedlings, and thin the seedlings out to avoid overcrowding, and to make sure the seedlings are getting good air circulation. If containers are being used, those containers should be thoroughly washed in soapy water and then rinsed in a 10% bleach solution after each use. If any plants are affected with damping off, remove them from the garden and then practice a crop rotation of 2 to 3 years. Downy mildew. This fungal disease thrives in cool, humid climates. At first, downy mildew causes leaves to turn yellow, typically starting from the main vein, then spreading outward. Fungal spores that are grayish, purple, fuzzy spots will then grow on the undersides of leaves. Downy mildew typically affects young, tender leaves, and severe infections can also cause curled and distorted leaves. Sometimes those affected leaves can then become dehydrated and then drop from the plant entirely. When seedlings are affected, their growth is stunted, and downy mildew can also reduce crop yields while acting as an entry point for other diseases. When older plants are affected, in addition to the lesions they get, they will also seem more rigid and narrow as compared to healthy plants. Here's what to do. Plant resistant varieties when possible. Practice good crop rotation. Ensure good air circulation around plants. And water plants early in the morning. This last tip gives the plants enough time to dry out during the day, making those plants less vulnerable to infection. Downy mildew is usually spread when leaves are wet for too long, so it also helps to avoid overhead watering. As well, be sure to keep weeds from growing. Once plants have downy mildew, the best thing to try is to eliminate moisture and humidity around the infected plants. If possible, try to improve their air circulation through selective pruning. In general, downy mildew normally clears itself up in an outdoor garden once the weather warms up, since it doesn't do well in warm temperatures. Also, if there are any infected plants, be sure to remove all crop remains after harvest to avoid reinfection, since this fungus can survive in crop residue. Keep in mind too that downy mildew is much easier to control when a plant's leaves and fruit are kept protected by a copper spray. Copper treatments can begin 2 weeks before the disease normally appears, and when a long period of wet weather is in store. Copper treatments can also start when the disease first appears. Then those treatments can be repeated at 7 to 10 day intervals for as long as the treatments are needed. Typically, collard takes 6 to 8 weeks to be ready for harvest. You can either crop the leaves and leave the root, or you can take the whole plant. Simply cut your collard when it's about 2 to 3 inches, 5 to 8 centimeters tall. This crop is very hardy and continues to grow slower even after the first fall frost. The leaves are actually the freshest when they have frozen once. As well, your fall crop will benefit from cool weather because it gives the leaves a better flavor. But if you've planted your collard in the spring, its quality is best when harvested before the weather gets hot and dry. After harvesting, wash your collard, then immediately cool it at 34 to 47 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 to 8 degrees Celsius to keep it fresh and crisp.